Welcome back, students. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I think let's just wait for a few minutes for those to join in. Students, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the your previous session, have you guys done with the Payment of Wages Act? In the previous class? Have you guys started with the Payment of Wages Act?
Yes, ma'am.
Last week, I think you were taught.
Today is my first class. I didn't know about that.
Okay. Anyone who had attended the previous lectures, can you tell me exactly from where have you actually started the Payment of Wages Act or no? Kshitij and Shiny?
Ma'am, I think sir has dealt with Payment of Wages Act.
Okay, completely.
Ma'am, actually, last 2 weeks I missed my class. That's why I am not sure it was completed or not.
Okay.
But they had
I mean, I have also missed the class actually, so I am also not updated till where he has finished the portion, but he has definitely started with it. But till where he has done, I am not.
Okay, no worries. Okay. Nevertheless,
as far as I think it they would have been completed it.
Okay. Nevertheless, we will, no worries at all, we will still study in detail so that it will be a good revision if you have studied it before, and if you were absent or did not attend it, then maybe you will get to learn. people are still in their break mode. Okay, nevertheless, we will just have a discussion and then we'll start with the legal provision. Okay, so like we know that when we are talking about deductions, what is the deduction? So normally, if I ask you about deduction, what is the deduction according to you? What is the deduction?
Subtracting any amount.
One by one, please.
Subtracting any amount.
Subtracting any amount. Very good. Whatever money you have been promised, from that there is a subtraction taking place. It is getting subtracted. Very good. What else? What else? What is deductions? In your own words.
Reducing the amount.
Very good. Reducing the amount. As promised, you are not getting that amount, but you are getting lesser than that. There is a reduction. There is a reduce. Very good, Auntie. Well, who else? Anyone who would like to try? Anything else about deductions? Okay, so I believe you all have a clear picture in mind what a deduction is. Deduction means something which you have been promised, the amount of wage that you have been promised, but out of that amount, there are unreasonable, unjustifiable reductions. Okay, that is nothing but deductions. Okay, so when we are understanding about deduction, section 7 of the Payment of Wages Act deals with deduction. It lays down what is the deduction. Okay, so in simple words, it says if an employee, if he has to give any amount from his wages to the employer, then that is going to be considered as deduction. What I said? I said that if an employee, if a workman, if he is constrained, okay, without any justified reason, if he is constrained, forced to give money out of the wages to the employer, then that is going to be considered as deductions. Is this clear? Is this clear, students?
Yes,
Is it clear? Okay. So section 7 talks about what deductions are. It says if you all have your material with you, it has very nicely listed out what are the deductions, what deductions are not tenable in the eyes of law. Okay? So it says at the time of the payment of wages, okay, to the employees, employers should make deductions according to the act only. Okay, so employers cannot arbitrarily deduct from the wages. That is no more allowed. Before the enactment of this act, or before the enactment of the Payment of Wages Act, you guys must have seen or heard about how the employers unreasonably, they used to deduct money from the wages of the employees. And in the hands of the employees, there were hardly any wages which was coming into their possession. Right? So, to overcome this hurdle, to overcome this exploitation, the law under section 7 has listed out that deductions can only take place under what has been mentioned under section 7. Okay? Under the law of the Payment of Wages Act. Apart from that, if there are any deductions which are made by the employer, then those are going to be considered as illegal deductions. Is this clear? So here if you see, very nice statement, it has been mentioned in your material as well. It says employer, okay, if an employee is constrained to give money to the employer out of his wages, then in that case scenario, it is going to be considered as what? Deductions. Very good. Just give me a minute. I'm going to. Can you all see my screen? Can you see the PPT?
No, ma'am.
Oh, just a minute. Have you seen any arbitrary deductions taking place? Have you ever come across anyone complaining that there is an arbitrary deductions taking place, maybe say at a construction place, right, where the workmen work, and have you ever seen or come across or heard about a situation wherein from the workmen, the workers, the employers actually deduct a lot of money as penalty in the form of penalty or in the form of fine? Have you heard or seen, maybe in the movies, or maybe when you've read books or heard from somewhere?
When
Yes,
we have seen,
Yes? Can you speak loudly, please? Yes?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, yes, Bunty. Yes, Bunty, I can hear you. Yes, Bunty. Okay, maybe till Bunty is connecting herself. Have any? Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
I can hear you. Students, can you all hear me?
yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So,
Ma'am,
Bunty,
actually, hello?
yes, Bunty.
Hello?
Okay, is it Shiny who's replying?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's shiny. I'm not.
Okay, because I can see the the highlight on you actually. Yes. Okay, Shiny.
Actually, ma'am, in our company, there is a contractor who is supplying manpower. So we came to know from the employee of the contractor that they have deducted the amount of uniform that they have provided to the worker. I mean, to the employee, contract employee. So this sort of deduction, which is, you can say, it's a sort of illegal deduction from the wages, can be termed as penalties.
Definitely. Any sorts of illegal fines, any sorts of illegal penalties which are not justifiable, which are just arbitrary, they are going to be considered as illegal deductions. Very good, Shiny. Anyone else who would like to share the experience of, even if you've heard or if you've seen in the movie or if you've read it in books? Have you
When
heard
we have
about
seen in the movies where the employer used to deduct from the wages in terms of previous settlement of loans.
Very good, yes. So this is nothing but an arbitrary deduction, right? So now let us see what deductions are valid and what deductions are invalid. Okay, so even if you have your study material, you can open your study material as well, and otherwise we have a PPT open as well, wherein we are going to discuss the points in detail. Okay, so now when we are talking about deductions, okay, there are certain deductions, okay, which are not considered as deductions. Okay, so for example, the stoppage of increment of employee. Okay, so for example, if there is actually, let me just, if you all want, we are going to have a discussion for next 20-25 minutes. So I think it is better that I see you guys, because like this I can just see the presentation but I cannot see you all. So if you all want, you can put your camera on as well, because it is going to be very interactive. We are going to study in detail, in depth, and have a discussion in regard to deductions. Okay. So now, when we are talking about deductions, okay, can you call the stoppage of increment of an employee as deduction?
No, ma'am.
Can you just, if a worker is not giving any increment, say his salary is 5,000 rupees, and if an increment is not given to him, can that be called as a deduction?
No, madam, not at all.
No, it is not going to be called as deduction. Can the stoppage of the promotion of an employee, can it be called as a deduction? For example, if a person
No, ma'am.
has not been given a promotion, then in that case scenario, can you say that the employer has done deduction from the wages? No. How about in case of stoppage of incentive for the lack of performance by an employee? In that case scenario, can you call it as a deduction? When you are
No, ma'am.
not getting incentives because of your lack of performance?
No, ma'am. It will not be
No.
counted as deductions.
No, it will not be considered that deduction. How about demotion of an employee? Demotion means opposite of promotion. Promotion means upscale. Demotion means downscale. Degradation. So can demotion be considered as can it be considered as a deduction?
No, ma'am.
No. So even demotion of an employee cannot be considered as an deduction. Okay. Furthermore, can suspension of an employee be considered as a can the suspension of an employee be considered as a deduction?
No,
No, ma'am.
Punishment.
Even suspension cannot be considered as deduction. So these are the important examples which you must keep in mind, that these are not considered as deductions. Okay, these are not considered as deductions. So if an employer is stopping the increment of an employee, okay, it is not a deduction. If an employer is not giving promotion, okay, to an employee, okay, that is not considered as a deduction. If an employer is suspending an employee, again, that is not a deduction. Okay. Furthermore, if an employer is not giving incentives to an employee, again, that is not considered as deductions. Okay. So, in such case scenario, if an employer is removing an employee or not giving any promotion or giving a demotion or not giving any incentives, those are not considered as deductions in the eyes of law as per the deductions mentioned in the Payment of Wages Act. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Furthermore, when we are actually studying Section 7, okay, of the Payment of Wages Act. So under Section 7, subclause 2, it says deductions made by the employer should be made in accordance with the Act only. So whatever the Act has stated in regard to the rules of deductions, that only will be considered as deduction. Everything else will not be considered as deductions. Is this clear? And deductions shall take place as per the provision of law. Which law? The Payment of Wages Act. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now, when we are talking about deductions, okay, there is a list of points which has been given. It says the following are said to be deductions and which are acceptable according to this act. So these deductions are said to be these points are said to be deductions firstly, and those deductions are acceptable, okay, according to this act. Now, which deductions are acceptable by the act? It says fines. But fines in what case scenario? Deductions for absence from duty. Okay? For example, if you are not coming for work, say that you were supposed to come for 15 days, but if you have not come for 10 days, and because you did not come, because you were absent, and in that case scenario, if your wages have been cut, okay, as a fine, then that is going to be considered as a valid deduction. Is this clear? Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
So,
ma'am, I have a question here.
yes.
Ma'am, what if the employee accidentally has damaged the property of the employer while work? Is the employer having the right to do deduction in that case to claim the loss that he has done?
If it
that
is
valid as per
if it is intentional, then definitely yes. If it is unintentional, then no.
okay, intentional, I mean it can't be proved, no, even if it has been done. How can it be proved that it is intentional? It has
If
to be
someone has seen him doing it, that purposefully someone is destroying the machine. In that case scenario, definitely. For example, if I have camera in my factory and I see the workman is oiling it, firing up the machine. Spoiled the machine.
Okay.
In such case scenario, definitely. But if the intention is not wrong, and if it is just the machine got spoiled because of the regular course of his employment, because he was working, then in that case scenario, no. Unless an extraordinary grounds is proved to that extent. Okay? So, are you all with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So fines, definitely, which are deductions for the absence from duty, okay? Then deductions for absence from duty, okay? Deductions from the absence of duty means you were asked to come, but you did not come. There was complete absence of your duty. You did not perform any duty. You did not come. You did not work. Then in that case scenario, deductions which takes place are going to be considered as valid as per this act. Okay. Furthermore, deductions for damage to or loss of goods made by the employee due to his negligence. Okay. So if the deductions are going to be considered as valid for the damage or the loss of goods of the employer made by the employee due to his negligence. Negligence means? What do you mean by negligence?
Ma'am, willful disobedience.
Willful disobedience. Then in such case scenario, the deductions are going to be considered as valid or void?
I'm valid.
Negligence is
Valid.
carelessness.
Carelessness. So in such case scenario, definitely the deductions which will take place by the employer against the employee, those deductions are going to be considered as valid. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Clear? Furthermore, deductions for house accommodation supplied by the employer or by the government or any housing board. So here what is it saying? That if the employer is giving a house accommodation, right, and against that he is deducting it from your wages, then that is again going to be considered as valid. Why? Because in return the employer is giving you house accommodation for it.
Yes.
Is this clear? So deductions for what? For deductions. So deductions for house accommodation supplied by the employer or by the government or any housing board in that regard for accommodation, that deduction is going to be considered as valid. Why? Because against that deduction, the employer is giving you house accommodation. Is this clear to one and all?
Yes.
So that deduction
Yes, sir.
is definitely valid. Furthermore, it says deductions for such amenities and services supplied by the employer as the state government or any officer may direct. So, if there are any deductions which are being made for any such kind of amenities or services which are being supplied by the employer, but under the direction of the state government, then in that case scenario as well, the deductions are very much going to be valid as per this particular act. Is this clear? So those deductions are valid. Next it says deduction for recovery of advances which are connected with the excess payment or advance payment of wages. Deductions for recovery of loans made from the welfare labor fund. So in that case scenario also, these deductions are going to be considered as valid. So what are these deductions? Deductions for the recovery of advances connected with excess payment of or advance payment of wages. So for example, if you have taken certain loans, okay, and against loan, the deductions are being made to your wages, then that deduction is again going to be considered as valid because it is completely attainable in the eyes of law, right? So that deduction is definitely going to be considered as valid because the loan was given to you. Against that loan, obviously the employer will have to recover the money of loan. So definitely he will have a right to deduction. So when he does that deduction, it is definitely going to be considered as valid. Is this clear? Is this clear? Furthermore, deduction for the recovery of loans granted for house building or other purposes. So here also, if the employer has granted you any loan for the purpose of house building, okay, obviously then you as an employee will have to repay back the money, right? So in such case scenario also, that deduction which is made by the employer against that house building loan is going to be considered as valid deduction. Is it clear? Is it clear to one and all? Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Furthermore, the deduction of income tax payable by the employed person. Obviously, if the employer is paying income tax on your behalf, then definitely he has a right of deductions from your wages. So this is again a valid deduction by an employer. Okay. Second, furthermore, deductions by the order of court. If the court so moto orders for such deduction, then definitely those deductions by the employer on the wages of the employee is going to be considered as valid. Why? Because here the court, okay, has given the direction. So therefore, this particular deduction is also going to be considered as valid. Is it clear? Are you all with me? Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Further it says deduction for the payment of provident fund, deduction for the payment to the cooperating society approved by the state government. So in this case scenario also, if there is any deduction for the payment of provident fund or for deduction for the payment of cooperating society approved by the state government, then in that case scenario also these deductions are going to be considered as valid. Further, deductions for the payment to the cooperating societies approved by the state government, then in that case scenario as well, that deduction, because it is a direction from the state government, it is going to be considered very much valid. Then deductions for the payment to a scheme of insurance maintained by the Indian Post Office, again a government sector, government body, then in that case also the deduction is said to be a valid deduction by the employer. Okay. Further, deduction made if any payment or any premium on the life insurance policy to the life insurance corporation with the acceptance of the employee. Okay, then in that case scenario also, because it is accepted by the employee, that deduction is going to be considered as valid or void?
Valid.
Valid. Very, very good. Next, the deduction made if any contribution made as fund to trade union with acceptance of the employee. Deduction for the insurance premium on fidelity guarantee bonds again is going to be considered as valid. Why? Because it is accepted by the employee. Very good. Then deductions for the payment of insurance premium on fidelity guarantee bonds with acceptance, this we've done. Then the deductions for the recovery of losses sustained by a railway administration on account of the acceptance by the employee of fake currency. Then in that case scenario also, because it is accepted by the employee, the deduction is going to be considered as a valid deduction. Is this clear?
Yes.
Further, deduction for the recovery of the loss sustained by a railway administration on account of failure by the employee failure by whom? By the employee on collection of the fare and charges. Then in that case scenario also, it is good. The deductions are going to be considered as valid. So this is a very interesting point. What does it say? If there is any kind of deduction, okay, which is for the recovery of any losses, which losses? Which is sustained by a railway administration On account of what? On account of failure by the employee in collection of the fare and charges. Okay? Then in such case scenario, the employer will definitely have a right to deduct wages from his employee, because this is willful negligence on the part of the employee, right? He had to collect the fare and the fare, but he willfully neglected it. So therefore, the deductions made by the employer against the employee is going to be considered very much valid. Is this clear? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Further, deductions made, if any, contribution to the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund with acceptance of the employee. Okay, again there is an acceptance from the employee. Then in that case scenario also deduction is going to be valid. Lastly, the deductions for the contribution to any insurance scheme framed by the central government for the benefit of its employee, with the acceptance of the employee, and in that case scenario, again the deduction is going to be considered as
Valid.
valid. Very good. So here the law under section 7 subclause 2 of the Payment of Wages Act have listed down which deductions are valid deductions. Now, leaving this list, every other deduction is going to be considered as a void, or it is going to be considered as an illegal deduction by the employer. Is this clear? So we have understood in detail which deduction is valid.
Ma'am, as per the study material, can you please let me know the page number, because I have been writing notes. So can you let me know the page number?
Sure, I think it's page number, it is 50.
50.
Yeah, so we've been studying 49, 50,
yes.
51. Got it?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So,
Yes, madam.
okay. So here now we know which deductions. First and foremost, now we know what is a deduction, right? We know what is not considered as a deduction, and furthermore, we know which deductions are valid. And now we can conclude that which deductions are not valid or which are illegal in the eyes of law. Can you conclude it now? Can you conclude it? Can you conclude it? Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
students? Yes. So my question to you is that if an employee is, first and foremost, I want to understand from you all that what is a deduction? What, according to you, is a deduction? What is a deduction? Can anyone tell me what is a deduction?
Sure. Then reduction in wages of employee under section 7 subclause 2 of Payment of Wages Act.
Correct. In your own words, can you tell me what is deduction? In your own words. If, for example, I want to understand from you about deduction, what is a deduction? Who deducts money from whose wages?
Ma'am, if an employee willfully harms the interest of the employer, then employer is liable to. Then the employer is empowered to deduct the wages from the employee.
Okay, very good. What do you mean by unreasonable or illegal deductions? Yes? What do you
Yeah.
mean by unreasonable deductions?
Yeah, may I?
Yes, please.
So basically, unreasonable deduction is mean to which is not defined in the any particular statutory act. The deduction, if we deduct from particular employee's salary, then it comes under the undefined and lawful deductions over there.
Very, very well. Very nicely said. If there is any unreasonable deduction which is made by the employer by using the employee's wages, then it is definitely going to be considered as a deduction, an unreasonable deduction.
Yeah, there is also is an provision wherein is such category deduction you do or you've done in from the salary of any particular employee, but there is a provision act says that you have to deposit that money in the LWF fund, not to the employer fund, company's fund. It strictly goes to, you have to submit that to the fund to Employer Labor Welfare Fund on yearly basis. That is the provision says.
Correct. Very well. But that provision, I have not explained it yet, but I'm very happy that you highlighted that point. Okay. But very good, Ranjit. I'm very happy the way you are interacting and the way you are answering and giving your inputs. Very well. Very happy with you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you. So now I want to understand one thing. When I am talking about deductions, okay, I know illegal deductions means those deductions which an employer, okay, wrongfully takes it from the employee, wherein he constrains the employee to give his part of his wages back to the employer. So we know that this is nothing but deductions, unreasonable deductions. Okay, my question to you is that now if a person, if an employer at a workplace, if he is demoted, will that be considered as a deduction?
No, ma'am.
If a person has not been given any incentives, then will he be considered? Then will that be considered as deduction?
No, ma'am.
No. If a person is suspended from his employment, will that be considered as deduction?
No.
No, ma'am.
If a person is not given his, if he is not given any increment or if he is not given any incentives for his work because of his poor performance, then will that be considered as deduction?
No.
No, ma'am.
No. Very well. So all these examples which I just stated, those are definitely not considered as deductions. Okay. Now, my question to you is that if an employee, okay, if he did not come for the work at all, if did not perform his duty, and if the employer as a fine deducts money from his wages, will that be considered as a valid deduction or will it be considered as invalid deduction?
Ma'am, it will be considered as valid deduction subject to 50% of total wages.
Correct. The value we will come later, but I just want to understand that you all understood the concept of valid deductions and void deductions. Okay, but very happy. Good, 50%. So, next question to you is that when suppose the employee has willfully destroyed the machines of an employer, and in that regard, employer deducts wages from the employee, then in that case scenario, will the deduction be considered as valid or will it be considered as void?
Ma'am, valid.
Valid. Very
Valid.
good. Very good. So that is definitely going to be considered as a valid deduction. Why? Because here the employee willfully neglected or there was a willful negligence on the part of the employee. So in such case scenario, the deductions which are going to be made by the employer is going to definitely be considered as valid in the eyes of law. Okay. Furthermore, tell me, if the deductions are made by the employer by the order of court, okay, in such case scenario, will those deductions be considered as valid or will it be considered as void?
Ma'am, valid.
Valid. Code is already directing just the valid.
Very good. Because it is the direction of the court, definitely it is going to be considered as a valid deduction. Okay? Now, if there is a deduction because there was an absence of duty on the part of an employee, then in such case scenario, will the deduction be considered as valid or is it going to be considered as void?
I'm valid.
Valid. Very good. My next question to you is that if there has been any deduction, okay, for house accommodation, which has been supplied by the employer or by any government, in that case scenario, the deductions which are made by the employer, will it be considered as valid or will it be considered as void?
I'm valid.
Valid. So here again, it is definitely going to be considered as a valid deduction. Okay. So now I believe you all know which deductions are valid. Okay. Now if I ask you, which deductions are not valid in the eyes of law, what would be your answer? What would be the answer?
Arbitrary deduction.
Arbitrary deduction. For example, if an employee has come for work and performed his duty, even after coming every day to work and doing the work, performing his duty, if the employer deducts from his wages, will that be considered as a valid deduction or will it be considered as a void deduction?
Void.
I'm void deduction.
Void deduction. Thorough void deduction. Okay. So now you all know that the law has listed down valid deductions which are completely attainable in the eyes of law. Apart from this, if there are any other arbitrary or unjustified deductions, then those are definitely not going to be considered as valid deductions. Okay. Now let us talk about section 7 subclause 3. It talks about limit for deduction. Now when we are saying that the employer will have a right to deduct from the wages of the employee, but up to what extent? Okay, there has to be certain limit. The employer cannot say I'm going to take the entire wages, you will not get a single penny. He cannot do this, right? So up to what extent deduction is valid? Any guess?
Might be 50%.
Okay, very good. It is a good guess.
Might be it's a 50%. Maximum 50% threshold will be there for the valid deduction itself.
Very good, very good. So here the limit has been listed down under section 7 subclause 3. What is the maximum limit for deduction? Okay, it says that the total amount. It says the total amount of deduction from wages of the employees should not exceed 50%. So if the employer wants to do deduction, he cannot do more than 50% of the wage of the employee. This is the golden rule. But only in case of payment to cooperative societies, deduction from the wage of the employee can be made up to 75%. Only in the case of cooperating societies. But otherwise, in any circumstances, the deductions from the employer cannot be more than 50% of his wage. Is this clear to one and all? Okay. The exception is only in case of cooperative society where the deduction from the wage of the employee can be up to 75%. Is this clear, students? Is this clear to one and all? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am. What is cooperative society?
Huh? Yes?
Cooperative society.
Yes. What about cooperative
What
society?
it is? Any example?
Okay. Can anyone give Manju, or can anyone tell Manju or explain Manju what is a cooperative society?
Can I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's basically the registration of the employer under the different category. Any employer registered under the cooperative society, them too, they declare such employer. So that particular category of employee can go for deduction for 75%. Otherwise, it comes under the Factory Act or otherwise the Shop and Establishment Act.
So Manju, did you get it?
No, I didn't get it.
So Manju, like you must have heard about cooperative society.
Yes.
Have you heard about cooperative society?
Yes.
So if there is any cooperative society, right? So otherwise, if you will see people are working under the industries. People are working as contracts in the construction site, right? For instance, in those case scenarios, the what is the reduction can be made by the employer, okay, against the wage of the employee up to the extent of 50%, not more than that.
Ma'am,
So if the
I am asking what is cooperative society and why it is 75%, not just 50. It's
okay, yeah. So if you understand the relation, then only you will get it. Why cooperative? So cooperative society, if you see the examples which we have read so far, right? So here you saw if the directions has been given by the state government or by the central government, then that limit is definitely going to prevail. So if you heard the examples which I just listed up above, right, where if you heard all the examples, so those directions, if it is given by the state government and the central government, then in that case scenario, the deductions in case of the cooperative society can be made up to 75%. So deduction is allowed by law. Is this clear, Manju?
Yes, ma'am.
So today we have studied about an important topic in regard to the Payment of Wages Act. We have done the introductory part. We have understood the important provisions in that regard. We have also started studying in regard to the deductions. Okay. So in our next class, okay, we are going to study the remaining provisions of the Payment of Wages Act, and most